Welcome back to the program. Let's get some more analysis now on today's address by the Chinese ambassador at the National Press Club and bring in Greg Sheridan, as we do every week. Of course, he's the foreign editor at the Australian. Greg, an interesting appearance, very much an appearance in two parts, really, talking up the positives and win-win and all that sort of stuff in the opening half, and then pushing back very strongly against any criticism in the second half.
Yeah, that's right, Kieran. You could see how uncomfortable the ambassador was with the free press. And I must say, I felt very proud of all you guys at the National Press Club. I felt very proud of the press gallery. Polite but insistent and fair questions. I thought this was a chilling address, really. There were emollient phrases in just the same way the Soviet Union would make speeches with lovely phrases about friendship and international cooperation in the 1950s. But underneath everything was a hard, threatening demand that Australia capitulate. He revisited Huawei. We're not allowed to have restrictions on Huawei. He revisited the absurdity that China's trade sanctions on Australia bubbled up from Chinese consumers and had nothing to do with the government. He told the abundantly obvious lie that our citizens in custody in China are receiving due process and, have access to Australian diplomats and so on. And he justified the criticism of Australia as breaching the United Nations Charter by expressing some concern about China firing missiles all over the northern Asia, while saying that China firing missiles into Japan's exclusive economic zone was simply a natural assertion of its rights, and so on. There are a dozen other examples as well. So there was a honeyed tone to some of it, but underneath, this was a velvet glove which contained an iron fist.
And when it comes to, I guess, the most blunt statement in terms of, definitive statement was about Taiwan, there is no room for compromise. He could not have been clearer on that. What was your read on that, given the events of the last few days?
There was a brutal and really, I think, quite frightening Stalinism at the heart here. One of the questioners said, don't the 23 million people of Taiwan get any say at all on their own future? After all, they've only been ruled by mainland China for 4 years in the last 130 years, and that was before the communists came to power. Don't they get any say at all? And the ambassador was quite clear. The fate of Taiwan will be decided by the 1.4 billion people of China. Now, of course, the 1.4 billion people of China get to decide nothing, but that is his code word for the Chinese government. In other words, the Chinese government couldn't care less about the interests or aspirations or anything else about the people of Taiwan. Somebody asked him about how can we have any assurance about how China will behave in Taiwan given the behaviour in Hong Kong. And he said, well, it's been a fabulous success in Hong Kong. A few loopholes were found and we ironed out the loopholes and now everything is a fabulous success. So he has a honeyed tone, which is the opposite of the wolf warrior, but underneath the message is exactly the same. Tremble and obey. Do as we tell you or you are in deep trouble. And I think this was a very useful speech today. My other reflection is the Albanese government is just about as unpopular with Beijing as the Morrison government was, despite what the ambassador said. And this shows that the problem, although I think the Morrison government occasionally got its rhetoric was exaggerated, nonetheless, the real problem was not Morrison's rhetoric. It was the deep fundamental difference in interests and values between the Communist Party of China and the government and people of Australia.
It was interesting. He was also quite clear, at least in terms of the response to my question on the Solomons and whether there'd be a military base there, if the Chinese Communist Party's got any intentions on that. And he said, no, it's time to turn over a new page, Greg.
Yeah, well, that was a great question on your part, Kieran, and I chuckled at the answer. And what it recalled to me was Xi Jinping's solemn promise to Barack Obama that he would not militarise the islands of the South China Sea. And now we know there are something like, 29, I think it is, military establishments of China in the South China Sea. So we can take that assurance with the same, credibility that we took the solemn commitment to the treaty about Hong Kong, that we took the promise not to militarise the South China Sea. Again, this is very much Soviet Union style stuff at the height of the communist rule, to say one thing and do the exact opposite. The other important thing to observe is that China has suspended talks on climate change cooperation with the United States. Now, we ought to reflect, what chance in the world is there of getting a real climate change action out of China when it sees this issue, like everything else, entirely as part of its transactional process with the West? I mean, it has no interest in climate change for its own sake. It just sees it as a way to transact business and exert leverage on the West. And I'm tremendously concerned that China is continuing these exercises around Taiwan. If China starts a military operation against Taiwan, it will start as an exercise and then transform into a real military operation. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it's very concerning.
Yeah, so just to elaborate on that, Greg, is this the new normal when we see crises used to just nudge forward or, to just gradually change the status quo, as you alluded to earlier, I think at the start of your last answer about the militarisation of the region of the South China Sea? It was done incrementally, wasn't it? And each time there might be a change in, a crisis or a change of position by someone, it would be nudged forward more and more by the military. Is this a new normal we're seeing now?
I think it is, Kieran, and the analogy with the South China Sea is very instructive. So at every point, the Chinese said, look, we're not really doing anything, nothing to watch here, don't be concerned, everything's fine, we're harmless, nothing. And then in a minute, the message changes to, we now own this territory and resistance is futile. And the intimidation in the ambassador's remarks of Australia, yep, we can have a good relationship provided we roll over and do exactly as we're told. We admit Huawei, we stop restricting Chinese companies' investments in Australia, we stop making any criticism over human rights, we stop even expressing concern about our citizens wrongly detained in China, and above all, we abandon the Taiwanese democracy and our allies and our alliance with the United States. So it's easy. You do all that, you get a fantastic relationship. I think it'll be critical to see whether they stop these exercises soon or whether they continue to impede shipping and air transport to Taiwan. The only force in the world that could withstand that kind of blockade is the United States Navy. The world is a lot closer to a really dramatic and terrible military conflict than we were 3 weeks ago.
And we're almost out of time, but just, it's not easy to sum it up quickly. But on the other side of the coin, you've got our great ally, and it's got its own issues. And we don't know whether Trump's coming back and what his response might be, or not just to Taiwan, but other allies, as we saw in his first term. So if he does win, there are questions on that front as well. So it's a precarious time, Greg.
Oh, it really is. So Trump was always willing to ditch Taiwan, according to John Bolton's memoir. He was his national security advisor for 18 months. He was very ropey on alliances. He confronted China, but even last week he condemned Nancy Pelosi for going to Taiwan and he hailed Xi as a very strong leader and all this. So there's within the Republican Party and within Trump an anti-alliance dynamic. And on the Democrat side, there's a left-wing anti-alliance dynamic, and Biden has been very feeble and is not increasing the defence budget in the way they need to get their Navy to match China's Navy, all of which means that the United States is much weaker than it should be, and we need to be capable of taking care of our own affairs very urgently.
Very much so. Greg, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Kieran.